I'd like to introduce you all to our April Noontime Knowledge speaker, Bridgette Moen. Bridgette is a registered landscape architect and the university landscape architect at the University of Illinois Champaign. Her primary interests are planting design and expansion of natural lands. Before her current role at the university, she served as planning director for the Champaign County Forest Preserve District, and before that, as a park planner with the Champaign Park District, where she developed master plans, designed park improvements, and generated grant proposals. She previously practiced as a project manager at Terry Gunn Design Associates in Chicago, Illinois. Bridgette received her Bachelor of Science and Master of Landscape Architecture degrees from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Welcome, Bridgette. I will turn everything over to you now.
All right, lovely. Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? If there's any issues with the sound, feel free to put it in the chat or interrupt me. So again, welcome to the Noontime Knowledge for our April session here. Again, I'm Bridgette Moen, campus landscape architect or university landscape architect within facilities and services. And I'm excited to share some knowledge on equitable access to open space, and we're going to focus primarily on Champaign-Urbana as well as Champaign County as a whole. So today we'll look a little bit at the importance of natural areas and open space to humans and why should we care about this, some recommendations for access, where we're doing really well, so community success locally, where we could be doing a little bit better, some room for improvement, and if this is something that's interesting to you, then how you can get involved in a volunteer capacity. So first, we'll start with why are natural areas and parks important? So there's a ton of research that shows the physical health benefits of spending time in parks and natural areas. So people who spend a lot of time in parks have decreased hypertension risks. They have reduced obesity rates, and there are especially positive influences for children that spend time in parks in their health outcomes, as well as older adults. Intuitively, this makes sense, right? If you're going to the park, you're probably walking a trail, you're walking a dog, you're playing tennis, you're playing a pickup game at basketball. If you're a kid, you're running around the playground, you're getting some good cardio. So those physical health benefits are fairly straightforward. There's also really a huge body of research that follows the importance of natural areas and parks to mental health. So spending time in natural areas can lower your stress levels, it can improve your cognition rates, and especially in children, and it can actually reduce symptoms of anxiety and depression as well. Why this is the case is because mental health benefits, it kind of follows the theory of something called attention restoration theory. So if you're at work, if you're staring at your computer screen, if you're in an intense conversation, if you're taking an exam, if you've been sitting through a 2-hour meeting, you have been sitting in traffic, whatever it may be, these types of daily activities require a lot of active attention. You're forcing yourself to pay attention. These are not things you want to necessarily be paying attention to. Your brain isn't automatically excited to focus during an exam or during a meeting. But there are things that provide something called soft fascination. So this is, you're on a walk and you see a butterfly on a flower. You are looking at a video or watching kittens play, a baby that's smiling. You look out your window and you're watching a donut or watching a squirrel eating a donut. These are soft fascination. These are things that don't require a lot of activity from your brain or extra effort to pay attention to. So these are things that provide soft fascination, and they're really important because they actually have been shown to reset your attention span. So if you go for a short walk, if you get out into a natural area, if you're even just in a grove of trees, it kind of helps reset that attention span by letting your brain just take a break and focus on soft fascination. So the quality and scale of open space isn't hugely critical. So in order to benefit from natural areas and parks, through your mental or physical health, you don't have to go to a huge park. You don't have to go to a state park. You don't have to go to the Smoky Mountains to get benefits from nature. Immersion is a great option if you're able to do that on vacation or on occasion, but realistically, you're not able to do that every day. There's great research. A lot of that has been conducted actually at the University of Illinois, that just having a window view of a grove of trees can have mental health benefits. So it's just getting out into those open spaces and natural areas that's really important. They don't have to be the most high quality natural area or 10,000 acre preserve or anything like that. So how much nature do we need? How much park space do we actually need locally? So for recommendations for that access, how much open space is enough for a community? So for typical parks, they're pretty straightforward recommendations, and we'll go through those in a minute here. For access to natural areas, there's actually less guidance from larger institutions or agencies on exactly how much nature is enough, but we'll look at a couple of guidelines here. So when we're looking at access to parks, it's just really, really important that we're reducing barriers to getting out to visiting parks. So people are just a lot less likely to get out and go to a natural area or a park if it's a pain to get there or if it takes too much time. So this is just a quick kind of shot from the Champaign County Forest Preserve District comprehensive plan, and they did a generalizable countywide, Champaign County-wide needs assessment survey asking residents, why don't you visit? You know, if you don't visit these natural areas, what's your reasoning for that? And there's a good proportion of the population that they're just not outdoorsy, like that's just not their thing, that's fine. But the second most prevalent reason, 35% say they're just too busy. They don't have time. And another big one is there's just nothing locally. There's nothing nearby. So 18%. And this is especially popular or a common response in Champaign County or Champaign. You just don't, it's really, you're busy. You don't have time. Anecdotally, I know that's a primary driver in my household. I love to go for a short hike after work. But by the time I pick up my kids and eat dinner and take children to various activities, like it's really hard to kind of make that time to make a drive out to a natural area. So for recommendations for that access. So the National Recreation and Park Association, which is the largest kind of larger agency that helps develop some of these recommendations, their industry standard is they look at, well, how many acres of parks do you have for every 1,000 residents? So in Champaign, Champaign-Urbana, we, for our community size, for about 100,000 to 250,000, their recommendation is that we should have about 9.2 acres per 1,000 residents. And we'll kind of come back to whether or not we are meeting that or exceeding that here in a bit, but 9.2 acres per 1,000 residents. For natural areas, those guidelines are a little less clear. There isn't a great, you should have so many acres by your population or so many acres of natural area compared to how large your county or municipality or whatever it is may be. There's not a great sort of national standard or guideline that is a recommendation that's well followed in the industry. There was in about 2020, the Global Biodiversity Framework, which is an international organization, set a goal to protect 30% of lands and waters by 2030. I will say that the U.S. committed to this pledge in 2020, and there has not been a lot of movement, unfortunately. There were a lot of commissions set up and a lot of committees created, but not a ton of progress on that goal thus far. So now we understand a little bit why parks and nature are important. But now we're going to talk a little bit about how we're actually meeting those benchmarks locally. So we'll start with successes. We have really amazing park districts and forest preserve districts in Champaign County and just in this region. And the word district is a really important one, and we're going to talk about that for a minute. So we have something called special districts. So you'll hear your park district, your forest preserve district, your conservation district. That's a common term you'll hear locally. So a special district is an independent local unit of government that has a very specific mission. So the reason I'm sharing an image of cows is this is from the Champaign County Soil and Water Conservation District. They have a very specific mission to work with landowners to improve water and soil quality. So this is from a program they have working with farmers on regenerative grazing to help reduce pollutants in runoff. So they have a very, very specific mission for their organization. So with these special districts, Illinois it's a little hard to tell exactly how many units of local government. That number is not well known. There are so many. According to the Illinois Municipal League, they think we have about 7,000 units of local government. They're not totally certain, and it's estimated that Illinois has more units of local government than any state. And this includes counties, cities, villages, school districts, road districts, sanitary districts. You name it, we have a district for it. The map to the right shows in gray, those are our municipalities, so Champaign and Urbana, but all of those squiggly lines everywhere else on top of the municipalities are all these other various districts that we have. But the reason this is important is we have something called park districts, forest preserve districts, and conservation districts locally. So as I mentioned, these are independent local units of government that have a specific mission. So these districts are their own thing. They have their own boards. They have the ability to collect taxes. They are able to own land. They're able to offer services. And so as opposed to recreation departments, they are their own municipal government. So a city council may be able to voice their recommendations. They may be able to ask questions of their park district or forest preserve district. They may, agree with what they're doing or not agree with what they're doing, but they have very little, if any, authority over the park districts. And so anyone that looks at their annual property tax bills knows that having all of these different districts as their own units of government that are levying a tax on your property, this can lead to higher tax burdens locally, but it really helps to protect those services. So a municipality, if there's an economic downturn, there's just problems at the city, whatever it may be, they can't rob Peter to pay Paul. So if taxes are collected by a park district for park district services, the city can't come in and sweep those funds for a renovation at City Hall or to cover a legal settlement or something like that. So although it can lead to a higher tax burden locally, with all of these different districts, you do end up with these really successful independent organizations that are great at what they do because they're able to protect their resources and follow their mission. So both Champaign and Urbana have their own park district, independent from the municipalities. Nearby, Rantoul also has a park district. Mahomet, Savoy, St. Joseph, other smaller communities, they have parks, but they are provided by their municipal government. Having a parks department instead of a district isn't inherently an issue. Long term, though, you're relying on the goodwill of your municipality to be excited about parks and to prioritize them. That can kind of come in fits and spurts, right? How important a municipality thinks that parks are, and how many resources they want to put towards parks. So looking at our local community, we'll focus a little bit on Champaign-Urbana. So in total, our population estimates right now, according to the Census Bureau, are approximately 130,000 people between both municipalities. So how are we doing? Do we have enough parks? So again, I mentioned before that acreage per 1,000 residents. So for a community of Champaign-Urbana size, we should have about 9.2 acres per 1,000 residents. We actually exceed that. So between Champaign and Urbana's footprint, their park footprint, there's about 1,700 acres of open space. So we actually have 13.2 acres per 1,000 residents between Champaign and Urbana. So that's awesome. We're doing really well in that regard. And overall acreage, when it comes to access, we're doing great. We're exceeding that kind of national median, and have enough park space. Another success in Champaign-Urbana is the parks are relatively well distributed. So this map shows Urbana and Champaign in gray. It shows the park spaces in green, and open spaces. And then the blue is a half-mile buffer around all of the parks. So we don't really follow a model like in St. Louis, where there's one really enormous park near downtown, like Forest Park. Our park space is much more neighborhood park aligned. So there's lots of smaller parks kind of all throughout Champaign-Urbana, which makes getting to them a little bit easier. So another community success locally is we just have really high quality park agencies here. Again, I'm focusing on Champaign and Urbana in this presentation, but the Mahomet Park Department does really great things, as well as St. Joe and in Brant-Toul. All over this area, parks are just really considered high quality and offer great services. So in 2023, the Champaign Park District won a National Gold Medal Award from the National Parks and Recreation Association. So this is a really prestigious award. They had to work really hard to get this thing. They beat out every other park district in the nation of that size. So that's a huge success for them. Then the Urbana Park District is also just really regionally well known for its popular parks. Anytime you talk to an alumni or someone that has lived here, and you're touching base with them, and they're like, oh, one of the first things they always say is, I really miss Meadowbrook Park. Like, I would go to Meadowbrook all the time. It was just one of my favorite places in Champaign-Urbana. That's kind of a common refrain. There's not a lot of communities where a neighborhood park is like, it's the thing that people connect with and they love, and they come back to over and over again. So I think that's really kind of special. In addition to our park districts, in our, kind of spaghetti monster of government agencies, we also have a forest preserve district of Champaign County. So the district covers the entire county, just about. And it includes popular destinations like Lake of the Woods, Homer Lake, Middle Fork River, and the Kickapoo Rail Trail. So those are kind of spread out throughout the county. There we go. Another success is residents rate the forest preserves and park districts really high. So this is another snapshot of the Champaign County Forest Preserves Comprehensive Plan. Again, this is from the county-wide generalizable survey. And I just want to point out that residents that replied to this survey, 49% of them and 41% rated park districts and forest preserves as extremely favorable, and even below that, somewhat favorable and favorable, or a high chunk of that pie. Only 7% said it was unfavorable. In discussing these results with the consultant who administered the survey, they said it's really unusual for any unit of government to get favorable ratings. Generally speaking, people don't go out of their way to be like, yeah, I love my local county government. It's the best and it's doing great things for me. No, not throwing any shade on the county, but people usually aren't excited to rate units of government extremely favorable. So people really value our forest preserves and our park districts locally and think they're doing a good job, which is great. So where could we be doing just a little bit better? We do a lot of things really well here, both in natural areas and parks, but of course, there's always room for improvement. So the Trust for Public Land and the National Recreation and Park Association recommend a park within a 10-minute walk. And that kind of goes back to those survey results of like, I just don't have time to get to a park or a natural area. It's like it's really hard to do that between work and other obligations to make time to get outside. And so this 10-minute walk, their research has shown like that's as much time that, if it's more than 10 to 15 minutes, it's sort of a burden to make it happen. It's hard. You have to schedule it in your day. If it's 10 minutes, it feels easy. So overall, Champaign-Urbana, when we're looking more specifically at parks, have pretty good coverage. So most of CU is, well covered with parks and open spaces, so that's great. However, we do have pockets, throughout town that don't quite hit that target. So here's a map showing in green are open spaces. We have these half-mile buffers in blue. And then in the purple is population density. So the light purple is it's not very dense. It might be farmland. It might be, in this case, it's commercial area in this part of town. Not a lot of people actually live there. But the dark purple is a fairly dense population. And in this kind of just screenshot of North Champaign, this is near like Walmart and Meijer in that area. There's a surprising amount of housing kind of tucked back in that part of town. And it's not particularly easy to walk to a park or open space. So not only is it just distance wise, more than a half mile from a park in some of these neighborhoods. But you really have to account for transportation barriers. So there are parts of this screen grab, this neighborhood that look like, yeah, I could walk 10 minutes to one of these parks. But then you consider what's happening with the geography. And right through the middle of this is I-74. There's no walking across that. Even in places where there are, spots where you can get across the interstate, they're generally kind of a miserable walk. It's not something you want to, bring your kids on a bike with. It's generally it's almost like having a river run through town, right? It's a huge barrier to be able to walk from this dense apartment complex over here to this Garden Hills Park. It's like you're just not going to make that journey. It's not a 10-minute walk. Even though it's only a half mile, it would take a really long time to walk from this neighborhood to this park. So there's just some physical barriers to getting there. Some of these underserved open space areas, not only is it high population density, but these are also sometimes neighborhoods that have a high proportion of low to moderate income residents. So this is looking generally, again, zooming out, looking at Champaign-Urbana. I will note this big kind of scary red blob in South Urbana, South Champaign shows high proportion of low to moderate income residents and virtually no park coverage. context is always really important when looking at those maps. That's mostly farm fields. And so it kind of looks like this huge gap in access to open space, but no one really lives there because it's mostly the South farm fields. But we will zoom in on an area again, showing where we do have high population density. So we're back in our North Champaign neighborhood, near that North Prospect kind of commercial district. And you can see in dark red, that's the same area where we had high population density, but it's also a high proportion of low to moderate income households. And these are areas that are functionally not walkable to parks or natural areas. So again, most of Champaign-Urbana has pretty good coverage and access when it comes to park space, but there's definitely some areas where, we could use some improvement. So we focused on parks for a bit. How do we stand on availability of natural areas? In general, again, the forest preserves are really well rated. They're well visited. People feel very strongly that they're beautiful spaces, which they are, but their footprint in the county is a little bit limited. So this is a diagram developed for the Champaign County Forest Preserve District Comprehensive Plan. And these these green circles show the relative size of a forest preserve district compared to the size of its county. So for example, Cook County, Lake County, DuPage County, and Kane County are all forest preserve districts in highly populated counties, but they actually cover a huge proportion of that county. So they have a large acreage and a large footprint when it comes to how much land they cover in the county itself. And I'm sure it's hard to see on Zoom a little bit, but this little dot here, this is Champaign County Forest Preserve District. So the amount of land that the Forest Preserve District owns in comparison to how big the county is, Champaign County is actually quite a large county. It's fairly limited. So it's kind of easy, I think, to assume that, in Chicago, there's less nature, but in comparison, there's a lot more acreage in Cook County, Lake County, and DuPage County of natural area than there is here in Champaign County or a lot of the neighboring counties in central Illinois. In Champaign County specifically, less than 1% of the county is public natural area. So this map shows in blue and greenish, again, that population density, but zooming out, looking at the whole county. So we have some relatively high population density in Champaign and Urbana, some population density in Mahomet, St. Joseph, in Rantoul, and then the peach color there, that is buffers from entrances to forest preserves. And so it's a 5-mile, 10-mile, and 15-mile buffer from these entrances. And so you can see where we have high population centers, we have lower access to natural areas for the most part. So why is that? Why do we not have more natural areas? They have high public support. The public really likes them. They think they're doing a good job. They really enjoy those spaces. So why is our footprint so much smaller than it is in Cook County or DuPage County? That is primarily a huge challenge for forest preserve districts and park districts and conservation districts in most of East Central Illinois. Is the price of land is incredibly high. So overall, our population, we have those kind of dense pockets in Champaign and Urbana, but it's kind of more rural and suburban in its overall land use. And the land next to those developments is just so expensive because it's really high quality value for farm production. it's not uncommon to see a single acre of land in Champaign County to cost $10,000 to $20,000, and that's just for 1 acre. So as just for example, Homer Lake is about 600 acres. Middle Fork River Forest Preserve is over 1,000 acres, and so that those dollars for acquisition really add up really quickly in Central Illinois. So it's just really a financial challenge to expand that footprint. So we looked through, why is nature important? Why do we care about it? What do we, why should we bother about parks and natural areas? We looked a little bit about how we're doing locally. Are we meeting those local or national benchmarks? And for the most part, we are. Where we need to maybe make some improvements. And I often like to also share how you can get involved. So if you're somebody that is passionate about parks, you're passionate about natural areas, you're passionate about just access to open space, whatever it may be, in addition to having really nice park spaces and forest preserves and nice facilities. Most of these agencies also have really good volunteer opportunities, and I love these because there's a huge variety of what you can do and how you can get involved. So this is just a snapshot from the Champaign Park District right now. You can help sew costumes. You can take tickets at the Virginia Theater. You can help with the Champaign-Urbana Special Recreation programs. There's a ton you can do out in the forest preserves. You can remove invasive species, help maintain trails. So there's a little bit of something for everyone, which I love. Another really valuable way to get involved is to help serve on a board or committee. So remember going back to our spaghetti monster of all of our various districts and districts throughout the county. All of those agencies have their independent board of commissioners. And so sometimes these are positions you have to run for. So you have to run a campaign and there's voting involved. Sometimes they're appointed boards or commissions. It depends on the district a little bit, but if you're passionate about this, you'd like to see more open space or whatever it may be in the parks or forest preserves, then getting involved in that way in a committee or a board is a really good option, and it's a rewarding experience. So there's tons of options for that as well. So in summary, great benefits, both mental health benefits and physical benefits to spending time in nature. And those aren't just anecdotal. There's a lot of really robust research showing the benefits of just spending a little time in a nice space outside. We're really lucky, I think, in this community to have high quality open spaces and natural areas that are kind of throughout the county and throughout Champaign and Urbana. But we do have some gaps, and those gaps aren't easy ones to fill. So there are some challenges to having more equitable access to natural areas and parks in Champaign-Urbana as well as Champaign County. They're expensive challenges, but that doesn't mean they're not insurmountable and not important ones to kind of focus on. So I wanted to make sure I got through all of my slides and everything to make sure there's plenty of opportunities for any comments or questions. So I'm happy to open that up for anyone that may have any comments or questions. I see from Nan in the chat, Hazel Park, so living in the Hazel Park neighborhood is really hard to access if you have a mobility issue. I absolutely agree. That's on Neal and Bradley in Champaign, if you're not familiar. It's actually a really beautiful space, but it's really, really hard to get to. So it's one of those where, if you're just looking at a map of all the parks, it looks like the coverage is really great, but actually getting to it is kind of challenging. Any other questions or thoughts or anything anyone would like to share? Okay, so Andrew said the distance map for parks shows good coverage, but does it include things like Mini Park 5 on the corner of Prospect and Church. So with that map, I turned off the um, buffers for things that they're called these mini parks. If you've driven through town, the mini parks are they're cute. They offer some green space, right? But most of the time, the mini parks are basically flower beds and a sign. It's not a space you're going to hang out in, or there's not a lot of recreation benefit. So those have been turned off, and also in Champaign-Urbana, if you kind of toggle those on or off, there's a lot of redundancy in the neighborhood park. Coverage. And so even with removing the neighborhood parks or the mini parks, the coverage doesn't change radically. That's a good question though. And I'm sorry, someone was asking another question.
Mine is actually kind of building on Steve's. I wondered, how does this apply also to the university since you're the university landscape architect? Do we fall under the same types of rules? Are we looking for more green space now that our student population is growing? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the focus of this was to kind of think community wide, what is our access? We, as far as, do we follow the same sort of recommendations when looking at that kind of park per thousand resident? We don't explicitly follow that in our master planning or campus planning. And that is partially because a lot of our existing um, kind of the framework for how our campus is planned inherently has a lot of that incorporated. And so when we think about spaces like the Guardian Quad, the North Quad, the Main Quad, the South Quad, that offers a lot of access to natural area or to open space. And so we don't think about it in the are we meeting that acreage per thousand resident, but we think about it a lot and we really include it in our planning when we're thinking about preservation of open space. So when we go through master planning efforts, or if there's a new facility request or whatever it may be, there's a lot of scrutiny on should we be filling in this open space with buildings? And sometimes the answer is yes, because it's an infill lot or, a facility has always been planned to go there. But if there was a request, for instance, to plop a building down on the South Quad, it would meet a lot of resistance from a planning perspective. And so it's less so are we meeting those national goals, but how are we preserving the really good open space that we have on campus now? And I will say there are a lot of steps to having a new facility be approved when it's infilling existing open space. That's a good question. Did I answer that, Steve?
Yeah, I think so. That was a good explanation. I think there's a lot too with the different you know plans that we have, and they kind of overlap into this area. I think it's good, for that explanation to kind of set up, where those fall in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that green space has been fortunately a kind of tenet of how our university was originally planned. And I think that we've done a pretty good job of preserving that as the campus has grown so much. So Andrew asked, is there a method for leaning on local park districts in areas of super high property value caused by the university? Scott Park helped a lot, but anyone living south of Green has very little green space available. I'm not sure frat park counts. And so this is kind of get into some of there are pros and cons, right, to having these special districts. And so the university, a state agency, has no official authority, right, over the Champaign or Urbana Park District. They can make the ask, they can coordinate, they can cooperate, they can have intergovernmental agreements, and they do all of those things. But when thinking about should or can the park district, I think the question is have more investment in those really dense areas. That's really where it gets down to more of their local control planning and what they think is the highest kind of value for their investment, and kind of politically what they think were the spaces they want to invest in. I will say one challenge of being in a campus town is that students count as residents, right? They're residents of Champaign-Urbana. They are residents of Champaign County. If they own property, they pay property taxes. If they're renting, their landlord pays property taxes. But students often do not vote in very high proportions for local elections. And so, if from a political perspective, sometimes student voices can be kind of lost. And I do know that the local districts try hard to engage with student populations. And it's really, really hard because there's just such high turnover, right? Like every few years, it's a whole new group of students that are interested in these things. And so I think that, could have been a slide in the slideshow, right? How to better connect with university students who are residents and also need access to green space, right? It's I think, a challenge for these local districts. And there's also the question, does Frat Park count? Frat Park does count. So it's actually Washington Park. It needs some investment. I would say that it is a space that could use a renovation, in my opinion. But so that is not run by the university. That is owned by the Park District. Other questions or thoughts?
Hey, Bridgette, great talk. That kind of leads into my question, I guess. How do we address the fact that not all parks are created equal? Some parks have a lot more amenities than others, and are the park districts and is the university maybe working on equalizing that a little bit?
That's a really good question. So today I wanted to focus on just like getting to open space, and you're right, all open spaces aren't created equal from a development perspective and quality perspective. So when and this is true for Urbana Park District, Champaign Park District, Forest Preserve District, any agency that is requesting outside funding for their parks, one of the things that they are required to do in that funding application and that scoring from the state is look at, well, where do you have amenities and are there gaps in those amenities? So on this slide, this is an image of Douglas Park. This is in North Champaign, kind of just north of campus. It is a historically underserved neighborhood, and there was a long time that the community was not happy with the condition of Douglas Park, and I will say that the Park District, I think, did a good job of recognizing that and finding funding, and they have since renovated. This is the newer splash pad. There's new basketball courts, a walking trail, and they just redid the softball and baseball fields in that park as well. And so I think there has been an acknowledgement that there are parks that have been sort of left to, not meet the needs of the community. And I think our parks generally, our districts do a good job of trying to meet those needs. Maintenance costs and development costs don't help that problem, right? It's expensive to develop parks. It's expensive to maintain them. But I do know that both districts at least try to spread the types of amenities around as best they can. I don't think that's, they haven't reached a perfect solution in that. I think there are parks that need investment in both Champaign, Urbana, county-wide. But I do think in the past 10, 20 years, that both districts have made some serious investments in parks that are in underserved neighborhoods. Does that answer your question, Matt?
Totally, thanks.
Mhm.
Bridget, this is Andy, and as I spend my lunch break walking along around Southside School here in the some of the curbway cutouts for rain gardens and things, it makes me wonder, about the collaborations with groups on campus like Red Oak Rain Garden and keeping maintaining spaces on campus and even out into the community and keeping some of these other spaces maintained. Is that a challenge that parks face, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, having a lack of resources to maintain things is not, unfortunately, not a unique problem to campus. You know, uh, Park districts, forest preserve districts, all of these agencies that own all of this land, one of the limiting factors isn't always I mean, a huge limiting factor is the cost of land, but another one is just the cost to maintain all of those spaces is high to do it well, right? To have parks that people are proud of and they want to visit, it's really hard. I would say there's pretty good collaboration, especially between the Champaign and Urbana Park District, which have a lot of intergovernmental agreements to share resources. And there are really strong volunteer groups for all of these agencies. I mean, I would argue that the Virginia Theater would not be able to continue without the like army of volunteers that helps run that place, right? I think that's true of a lot of the high quality natural areas that we have in both the parks and the Forest Preserve District. Those require just a lot of investment and time. How well do we kind of collaborate or share like as a larger volunteer network? I think that's a little bit of a gap. I think that there is room for these various districts to work together in recruiting and training volunteers. Same with staffing. So, kind of funny example of that is the Urbana Park District and Champaign Park District have different insurers, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but that means that the type of training their lifeguards get is different. And so if you're a lifeguard at Sholem, it's really hard to also be a lifeguard, pick up hours at the Crystal Lake Aquatic Center. So there are some places I think that having all of these different agencies and this redundancy is really good because it helps protect resources, but I do think it makes it more challenging to coordinate, volunteer recruitment and training and also staff recruitment and training. So that's a great question.
I was wondering, so the one that Park District Park in Champaign that I've been seeing getting a lot of notice lately is Prairie Farm, and they're talking about moving it further out, which would seem contradictory to what you're saying about keeping things walkable. So, do you have any insight to why they're talking about doing that, or what that would mean for the people who already live near Prairie Farm but suddenly wouldn't be able to get there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question thinking about just easy access and that kind of walkability. I mean, I'm no longer with the park district and I'm not, a representative of them. I'm just somebody that is obsessed with natural areas and parks and knows this world well. So I have been following those studies that have been issued on potentially relocating Prairie Farm. And I mean, they're looking at the pros and cons of that, right? I mean, Zond, the proposal I have seen anyway, suggests moving it to Zond Park, which has benefits in that it was actually a farm. Prairie Farm's kind of this funny vestige. It's not a historic farm in that it's not an old farmstead or anything like that. It's actually, there were just staff people who were like, wouldn't it be cool to have a petting zoo? Which it is cool and I like it. But it's not like a historic property necessarily or tied to local agriculture in that way. And so I do understand some of just the land pressures of having something like that in the middle of town. I personally love that it's so easy to get to, and it's kind of in core, like more of the core of Champaign where there's high population density, but I can see some of their arguments for relocating it. But I would say this is one of those topics, right, where it's really helpful to have good involvement in local park boards and commissions and advisory committees to share those thoughts. It's harder than you think it is to get public feedback. Even if these agencies try really hard to reach out to community groups, it's incredibly hard to get people to show up to public meetings or share their feedback. People just only have so much time in their day to do that. So did that answer your question, Rebecca?
Yeah, it did. It just, again, you were talking about the desire to keep things local, and then that one just seems, I understand, if they're planning on expanding it or whatever, there's certainly no room to grow there for.
Yeah, Centennial Park is getting a little bit, it's a big park, but it's getting a little, it's pretty populated, right, with how many program types are in that space. So, it is a little 6 or half dozen, depending on what the goal of that program is.
Yeah.
So Andrew asked, are there any ways for large schoolyards to be converted into off-hour parks? And so are there ways like McKinley Field to be more accessible? Obviously when schools aren't in session. So again, this is another place where having separate districts can make that more challenging, because it's not like a municipality can just tell the schools, hey, open these to the public or let the park district use them. It's kind of on those individual districts to kind of work that out. I will say that the schools and park districts do work fairly close together. I'm sure that coordination could always be improved. But for example, for a long time, the Champaign Park District was using gym space of the local schools, so specifically Bottenfield and a couple of other schools locally, where the park district helped, financially with those renovations or additions in exchange for being able to use that space for youth leagues or open gym time. So that coordination does happen, and those agencies do share those financial resources. I always think that could be improved. So you mentioned McKinley Field. I believe McKinley Field has kind of open hours for the community. I don't. I wish I knew what those were a little bit more. But again, this is where I think it's important to share these ideas with all those local boards and commissions and committees, because sometimes the question just needs to be asked, right, to help those staff people know that it's a community priority to have that coordination. That's a good question, though. We're wrapping up, getting close to 1 p.m. So if there are any final thoughts or questions, I could probably take one more. If not, though, I just want to say, thanks for letting me share my off hours obsession with parks and natural spaces and kind of those great resources we have. And again, I hope this was informative, kind of knowing why it's important to have access to these spaces and understand that we really have, I think, gems in the community when it comes to parks and natural areas. And, hopefully this has motivated some of you to get more involved in either volunteering or sharing some of these really good ideas with these local districts.
Thank you so much for speaking with us, Bridgette. This was really informative. I found out a lot more about who's responsible for what than I ever would have thought of. So I appreciate your speaking with us.